Hello, everyone. I think we might get started now. Welcome to the National Drug and Alcohol Research Centre webinar series. My name is Calvert Tisdale, and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at NDARC at UNSW, and I'll be chairing the webinar today. But before we start, I would like to first begin by acknowledging the Bidjigal and Gadigal people as the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm joining this meeting, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, noting that our speakers and audience are joining from many different locations across Australia and further. And I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to any First Nations people present today. So today we have a very exciting presentation that is a little different from our typical subject matter of alcohol and other drugs, and will be instead centered around a different addictive disorder, gambling disorder. So today I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker on this very important topic, Dr. Hannah Pitt, and they will be presenting on the impact of gambling marketing on young people. Dr. Hannah Pitt is a Vic Health Research Fellow in the Institute for Health Transformation at Deakin, and is a qualitative public health researcher, completing her PhD back in 2018. And her PhD was exploring the impact and influence of sports betting marketing on children's attitudes and consumption intentions. Their focused research is around exploring the tactics of harmful industries, the impacts on children and young people, and how we can more effectively engage young people in the public health response that relates to these issues. Hannah will also be joined for the panel discussion that will follow her presentation by Dr. Simone McCarthy, who is a postdoctoral research fellow also at Deakin, working in the area of commercial determinants of health. Simone's PhD also qualitatively explored gambling, but looked at women's experiences of gambling and related harms, specifically investigating the practical and political ways to prevent harm for women. So that will be a very exciting discussion. As a reminder, we will aim to have time for questions at the end, so please send any questions you would like to ask Hannah or Simone into the Q&A function throughout the presentation and also following the presentation as well. I will present as many of these questions as possible to the panel and endeavour to ask as many as I can, but it may not be possible to ask them all. I will now invite Hannah to turn on their camera and take it away.
Thank you, Calvert. Hi, everyone. I'm Hannah Pitt. I'm a Vic Health Research Fellow at Deakin University. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the impact of gambling marketing on children and young people, but from a public health perspective. I would first also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're all meeting today. For me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and anyone who might be on the call today. I have no conflicts of interest to declare, but I do have a range of funding sources. I'm also an editorial board member for Health Promotion International. And I'd also just like to acknowledge the broader team that I sit within, led by Professor Samantha Thomas, but also including Dr. Simone McCarthy, Grace Arnott, Emeritus Professor Mike Jorb, and Professor Melanie Randall. I'd also like to acknowledge the many participants who have shared their attitudes and experiences with us. So first, I just wanted to start by talking about gambling as an unaddressed public health problem. I won't go into too much detail here, but Australians are some of the biggest gamblers. We lose over $20 billion each year to gambling, with New South Wales having the highest losses in the country. While gambling is promoted by the gambling industry and some governments as a leisure activity that only harms a small amount of the population, in reality, gambling affects not only individuals, but their family, friends, and the broader community. It's also contributing to some of Australia's most pressing health and social issues, including mental health, relationship breakdown, financial stress, family violence, and suicide. Gambling is also not an ordinary product. And unlike other harmful industries, it consists of a range of different types of products, some less harmful than others, however, all with the ability to cause harm. For example, there are very few other non-gambling products that have self-exclusion schemes because they are considered so harmful for individuals. We've increasingly seen that those who should play a key role in promoting and protecting community health and wellbeing have become integral to the normalisation, legitimisation and promotion of the gambling industry and its products. So gambling research that takes a public health perspective rather than a psychology or addictions-based framework has been growing for about a decade now. Our team at Deakin is one of the largest independent public health groups looking at this issue. However, as the public health terminology has become more popular, we've seen a capture of this language by governments, not-for-profits, and even the gambling industry. We talk about this as the capture of public health, as we are starting to see these organisations say that they're using a public health approach, when really it's very inconsistent with true public health principles. This allows the industry to distort, reframe, and capture the public health narrative for their own advantage. As a more subtle example, here is a government organisation who state that they take a public health approach, but limit their definition to only a few determinants. For example, they say a public health approach recognises that it impacts that it is a range of individual sociocultural environmental determinants and how they contribute to the harm experienced by individuals, communities, and populations. Now, while I don't think this was necessarily on purpose, language is important, and it's great that governments say they are taking a public health approach to harm prevention. However, they are not acknowledging the key vector of harm, the industry. So knowing that those with vested interests were capturing the true meaning of a public health approach to gambling, we have seen some confusion from governments. We decided it was time to create a more robust and inclusive definition. We say that a comprehensive public health approach to gambling recognises that gambling harm is caused by a complex interplay of individual, sociocultural, environmental, commercial, and political determinants, and advocates for independent, i.e. free from gambling industry influence, on policies and strategies that seek to prioritise health and wellbeing, protect individuals, their communities, and families from being harmed by the gambling industry, its products and practices. So taking a public health approach to gambling means looking at these issues from a population level and seeing how we can prevent gambling harm in our most vulnerable. Children and young people are one group considered at risk of gambling harm. One survey conducted with Australian young people found that those aged 12 to 17 years had ever reported gambling, and that was 31% of those people. 6% had gambled in the past month. And then of those 6%, 34% were classified as at risk and 15% as problem gamblers, which is based on a screening tool that was adapted for juveniles. This presentation will focus on how commercial determinants, particularly gambling marketing, has impacted children and young people. So now let's go through some of those corporate marketing practices of the gambling industry. Marketing is one of the biggest contributors to gambling risk. In 2020, $271 million was spent on gambling marketing. However, this doesn't include sponsorship or social media spend. The saturation of environments with gambling marketing has caused immense community outrage, with concerns relating to the risk posed to children. Young people are highly susceptible to the marketing that they see, which is why in 2020, the WHO, UNICEF, Lancet Commission on Children reported that gambling marketing is a potentially large and unaddressed public health challenge. Typically, a lot of the research focus has been on traditional forms of advertising, such as TV, commercial break advertising, and during sport. But marketing is much broader than this. So in a paper from last year, we defined the contemporary marketing of gambling as the full range of direct and indirect advertising, promotion, sponsorship, incentives, public relations, lobbying, and donations that are strategically used by the gambling industry to promote its product, gain publicity, attract new customers, shape social and cultural attitudes, and build corporate and product image and support. In this context, we see marketing as practices that have two interrelated functions. One, to promote gambling products and corporate branding, and two, to promote the corporation's image as that of a good citizen demonstrating social responsibility. Thus, the industry builds legitimacy in the mind of the public and policymakers, and by creating this image, it can prevent or delay regulation by governments. So we know that children and young people may be exposed to gambling marketing, not only through TV advertising, but in a range of everyday environments. This figure in a paper we published last year tried to map those different ways that children and young people might see gambling. This includes sporting environments like team sponsorships and around the ground, community environments like betting shop signage and billboards, on social media, traditional television advertisements, and corporate social responsibility initiatives, such as industry-funded education and responsible gambling campaigns. So I'm sure we've seen lots of examples in our everyday environments, but here are just some visual examples around the grounds, what we might see on jerseys, responsible gambling campaigns, and even being the stadium name. But as traditional marketing platforms are becoming more highly regulated, for example, in 2018, the federal government banned sports betting ads during live sport up until 8:30 p.m. The gambling industry are looking for other places to shift and diversify their marketing. Digital marketing, particularly on social media, creates a whole new ability for young people outside of sport to be exposed to gambling marketing. It includes not only sponsored posts, but also content that gambling companies post to their own accounts, and also content that appears about gambling that is posted by everyday people or even celebrity users on these platforms. So it's very easy to get around age restrictions, and it's very difficult for parents to monitor and know what young people are being exposed to online. In a study that I conducted, which mapped the social media posts of sports betting companies, there was a range of content that they posted and shared on their social media accounts. This included celebrity panel shows, podcasts with ex-athletes, posts about pop culture and humour. All of this type of content promotes the brand, and many posts called for users to engage with their content through liking, sharing, or tagging their friends in the comments. One sports betting company had almost 1 million followers on Facebook. And so a lot of this content might be related to sport, humour, and celebrities, but it isn't always linked to gambling. These types of strategies are particularly appealing to young people and can contribute to the normalisation of gambling. We also need to be thinking about the emerging platforms where young people are engaged. So TikTok is one of those platforms that we know is highly used by young people. While gambling advertising was initially banned on the platform, a trial introduced in 2023 saw sponsors posts being allowed from some sports betting companies, as long as they only appeared to accounts of those over 21 years of age, and as long as they contained a gamble responsibly message. These videos were quite difficult to tell that they were advertisements, as they looked like any other typical TikTok content, and they utilised the viral trends that were occurring at the time. It also demonstrated that these companies, which had previously targeted young men, were starting to use strategies that might appeal to young women, such as the use of social media influencers and content relating to current pop culture or non-gambling related events. For example, in the screenshot here, you can see that it says, "Sportsbet, finally letting me to bet on things I actually care about, like the Rihanna Super Bowl or halftime show." And next, I just wanted to show an example of one of these TikTok videos, because I thought maybe you might not have seen one before. So it's a bit intense when it first starts.
Apparently this is jockey called J-Mac. Yeah, J-Mac. And he is apparently the best of the best, according to the Sportsbet app, and he's going to be wearing blue. So I thought, why don't we do a little matchy match and be front of mind? When guys see us, they'll be like, oh my God, picked a winner.
So now let me take you through the research that we've conducted with children and young people. Our team at Deakin has led a lot of the qualitative research exploring the impact of gambling marketing, particularly on children. This has included multiple, predominantly qualitative studies that aim to understand what children and young people remember and think about gambling marketing. And there's way too much for me to go through in terms of study by study, but I just thought I would bring about the main themes that we're seeing across these studies. So most of these results are drawn from studies with children and young people aged 8 to 24 years, but most of that will be from under 18-year-olds. So in all of our studies, young people have had a strong recall of gambling ads. Over 90% of young people in some studies said that they could remember seeing a gambling ad. They tell us that not only do they see gambling advertising while watching TV and watching and attending sporting games, but they even see marketing for gambling while walking down the street. And this is from my main street that I saw one time. So I thought it was interesting that it really is kind of everywhere we look. And so when we ask young people specifically about social media, young people also report seeing gambling ads across social media platforms. For example, one person said, mostly in Instagram, like it will just pop up as an ad when I'm scrolling or something. Or when watching YouTube, we'll often have sports bet ads pop up and they're usually bright and colourful, using colours yellow and blue. So in one study, we looked at how young people might be exposed to gambling and gambling marketing in their everyday lives. In this figure, we demonstrate that young people are exposed through social exposure, such as being around or seeing other people gamble, physical exposure, such as attending pubs or clubs where they know gambling is co-located, or a belief, and also a belief that gambling is very accessible and so that you could access gambling in lots of places in their everyday environments. And lastly, symbolic exposure, which is more specific about seeing gambling marketing, even those instances where they saw gambling being performed in TV or movies. And so not only can young people recall where they've seen ads, but they also demonstrate a depth of knowledge about these ads and the brands. So young people have detailed recall about the plot lines of ads, taglines, and even specific strategies that they associate with different companies, such as humour and celebrity endorsements. In one study, we asked young people aged 11 to 17 to tell us what colour was associated with which gambling company, with 55% getting at least one or two right, and a further 36% getting three or more. So for example, what we did was we would say, what's the colour that comes to mind when you think of the TAB? And they'd say green, or Ladbrokes, and they'd say red. We also did a thing where young people were asked to name multiple, where they were asked to name the gambling brand when we removed it from one of the advertisements. So young people could list lots of brand names, but they were actually able to say that ad is for a particular company. So gambling marketing is also influencing attitudes and perceptions. Young people often tell us that marketing makes gambling look fun, exciting, and easy. Young people also recall that they say that it looks like a fun thing to do with your friends. And there's also a perception that gambling can make you money. A more loyal sports fan, and the advertisements contain positive messages that make you seem like you'll win. Like one person said, they make it look glamorous and exciting and a fun way to make money. So a lot of our research has also explored normalization, because the more normalized a product is, the more likely someone will have positive attitudes about that product and then want to try it. So 75% of children in our study thought that gambling was a normal or common part of sport. And this was particularly due to the marketing that they had seen. They said that it makes it feel like lots of people are gambling on sport and that everyone is doing it. And I mean, this is highly unsurprising given how entrenched sporting codes and broadcasters are with the gambling industry. We just have to look at the recent announcement from former AFL boss who has taken over as the TAB CEO. Although we have seen a shift, so in some more recent studies, we've found that some young people have become more critical of sports' relationship with gambling, with young people stating that they think it's normal, but that it shouldn't be. So young people also believe that there are specific strategies that are used within gambling marketing that will be highly influential on other young people and the broader community. In one study, just under 80% thought that gambling advertising on social media could influence young people to want to gamble. Studies have found that young people report deals and promotions, as well as celebrity endorsements, as some of those most influential strategies. This was because they believed that deals, such as cash or money back, could make you feel like you could have a bit of a go without any feelings of risk. Young people also talked about how there was a level of trust associated with celebrities, particularly ex-athletes who they idolised, adding a level of credibility to the gambling brand and suggesting that it must be acceptable if the celebrity is endorsing it. So one of those quotes from a child about this, they said, I see this one quite a lot on YouTube ads, and it's like stuff like bet on LeBron James to score over 25 and you get double your odds back. Or bet this much on him to get a triple double, which is like when you get 10 assists, 10 rebounds, and 10 points, and you'll get like 3 times your money and stuff like that. So what's the overall impact of this marketing? Multiple studies have found that young people are interested in trying gambling. This has been due to a few reasons: wanting to try because they have a good deal, they have a perception that they are knowledgeable and so can't lose, or because they think they'll be influenced by their friends and family. Others think that gambling marketing might not influence their own gambling, but could be highly influential for other people. And since I've been doing this work, we've really started to see young people's willingness to talk about wanting to try gambling change. And while they may be reluctant to say that they want to gamble when they're older, many still indicate that they would like to try this, as though it was seen as an adult rite of passage. And so now we know how gambling marketing is influencing and impacting children and young people. I now want to talk about what young people themselves think needs to be done to protect communities from gambling. So in a study with 11 to 17-year-olds, we asked them what their recommendations would be to counter the normalisation of gambling and prevent gambling harm. And they came up with 5 key recommendations. These recommendations related to reducing the access and availability of gambling, reducing and addressing the recent and regular use, shifting social perceptions, and altering perceptions that gambling is an accepted part of everyday life. But let's talk more about some of those recommendations that were specific to marketing. So untangling the relationship between gambling and sport. Many young people discuss the pervasive and embedded nature of gambling within Australian sport. Some participants have been critical about how normalised gambling had become within sport, and that individuals felt that they needed to gamble to be part of sport and sporting culture. They thought there should be stronger efforts made to reduce this relationship, either through government regulation or through sporting codes taking action. Some young people thought that sporting organisations needed to take a greater stand against gambling within sport. This is still something that young people are a bit conflicted with a few young people believing that gambling sponsorship provided a financial benefit for the sporting teams, and so kind of thought that the benefits outweighed the risks. Restrictions on advertising. So young people have consistently had a clear message that they thought that there should be much less or no gambling advertising in our communities. This included limiting the number of and spend on gambling advertisements to complete bans. Young people perceived that government, broadcasters, and the gambling industry were most responsible for reducing young people's exposure to gambling marketing. However, some thought that it wasn't appropriate for the industry to be involved, and others were quite sceptical of government's willingness to regulate. So then finally, the need for counterframing in commercial messages about gambling. Some young people were highly sceptical and critical of current harm prevention messages about gambling. Young people could recall messages such as gamble responsibly, and while they recognised that this was to encourage individuals to be safe and in control, few thought that this was effective. Instead, they suggested counterframing messages that were more prominent and that were focused on honest information about the risks associated with gambling rather than responsibility and individual behaviours. Other suggestions related to making public health campaigns more appealing to young people and using celebrities or social media influencers to get the message across. So how do young people want to be engaged? Young people are able to critically think about gambling marketing and what could be done to not only protect other young people, but also the broader community. We need to be doing more to find effective mechanisms that meaningfully engage young people in discussions and decisions about their own health and well-being. In a recent study we conducted with 12 to 17-year-olds, which is currently under review, we asked them if and how they would like to be engaged in the decisions made about gambling. Many wanted to say because they felt as though they had a unique and authentic experience and were often directly impacted by gambling marketing. Some reported that we needed information and education about these issues so that young people felt more confident to provide solutions to gambling. This included creating social media content to reach more young people, to tell them about the issues relating to gambling and the gambling industry. Others reported that they wanted more accessible mechanisms to influence and participate in decisions, such as direct lines of communication with decision makers or greater opportunities to participate in research. So to finish this presentation, I just want to run through some of the current government regulations and finish with some concluding remarks about where to next. Just to give you a bit of a summary of the current marketing regulations. So gambling ads are not meant to appear when children would be watching, for example, in G-rated programs or programs directed primarily to children during the hours of 6 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. and 4 till 7 p.m. However, news, sports and current affair programs are all exempt from this. So if you're ever watching TV in the afternoon, you'll notice that some news programs start at 4 p.m. This is also why you might see a gambling ad during shows like The Project. In 2018, as I've already mentioned, gambling advertising both on TV and radio was banned during live sport up until 8:30 p.m, 5 minutes before and after the game. However, this doesn't include sponsorships or any marketing that appears during the game, and it doesn't apply to horse racing or lottery ads. And even if you watch the footy, even last night, that didn't start till 8:30 and went until about 10 o'clock. So you can see where these loopholes are. And lastly, there are some rules around the content of gambling ads, which says that they shouldn't target children, make exaggerated claims, suggest that gambling is a way to achieve success, or make connections between gambling and alcohol. So then what are we seeing from Australian governments? There has been a significant concern from public health professionals, governments, parents and communities about the impact gambling, particularly the marketing for gambling, is having on the next generation. Governments have responded by implementing a range of strategies with the aim of protecting young people, but really have created more loopholes and opportunities for the gambling industry to continue to provide and promote their products. These strategies are inconsistent with a public health approach and have included the regulation of a single form of marketing, restricting a form of advertising during a specific time slot, and has also impacted the type of education that young people receive. This includes reinforcing normalising messages about gambling with an emphasis on individual and personal responsibility rhetorics. But due to this constant public concern about gambling, a parliamentary inquiry into online gambling and its impacts on those experiencing harm was conducted. And in June 2023, the committee released their report. This inquiry concluded that enough was enough and came up with 31 recommendations. They highlighted the need to look at gambling through a public health lens and stated in the report that gambling advertising was grooming children and young people to gamble and encourage riskier behaviour. In recommendation 5.148 relating to gambling marketing, for the first time, they announced a tobacco-style ban of gambling ads. They wanted to see a comprehensive ban on all forms of advertising for online gambling to be introduced in 4 phases over 3 years with a need to commence immediately. However, as of June 2024, we are still yet to receive a response from the government. So with that in mind, we have lots of evidence that highlights the impact and influence of gambling marketing on children and young people's attitudes and behaviours. We know that young people are heavily exposed to gambling marketing in their digital and everyday environments. They have a deep recall of the content of gambling ads and of brand-specific strategies. And we can tell that this marketing is shaping young people to think more positively about gambling and is significantly contributing to the normalisation of gambling and reducing risk perceptions. And we need governments to act now. Until they do, we will continue to advocate for a comprehensive ban on all forms of gambling marketing, recognising that gambling marketing is much broader than just traditional forms of advertising, and that by regulating just one type means the industries can then shift and adapt and push their marketing strategies on different platforms. There is a desperate need to include children and young people in conversations and decisions relating to gambling marketing, and we need to be doing more research to understand how best to do this, while also working on mechanisms to effectively engage young people right now. So thank you for listening today, and I hope that I've been able to share some things about gambling that you might not have known before.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that very engaging and interesting presentation, Hannah. I think the digital interface of gambling and marketing is an ongoing and emergent area of concern. And we're seeing the varied impacts of social media across not only gambling, but most addictive disorders as well. So you've highlighted that very well. But to discuss it further, I'd like to invite Dr. Simone McCarthy to turn their camera on. Hi, Simone. Um, do you have any immediate reflections that you'd like to share or add to that amazing presentation, given your own research focus on young women's engagement, specifically with gambling and the appeal to that demographic? Did you want to talk about Hannah's presentation through that lens, perhaps?
Yeah, definitely. And thanks, Hannah, for that great presentation and all the work you've done leading the space with children and young people. So I took a couple of notes down that I wanted to reflect on today. Yeah, one of the most compelling aspects would have been that you've discussed was the normalization of gambling and the influence this is having on children and young people's attitudes and their intentions to gamble. And I think we've all noticed sort of that integration of gambling into everyday activities and that association with sports and social media. And these are things that young girls are just as exposed to as young boys. We can't forget that when we're thinking of young people, girls are just as interested in sport, and if not, they're being exposed in all sorts of other ways. And really great TikTok as well, Hannah, sharing that, especially for that's a female influencer, should have quite a female audience who would be interested in her content, and it does present gambling in a more feminized way. I think when you're looking more at horse racing and attending the horse races, dressing up, that kind of thing. And we know from my research I've done with women and what kind of drives their engagement with gambling, a lot of that is to be social and being around other people. And we know that with sports betting, some of the women as well start engaging as a way to connect with boyfriends or connect with people who are watching sport together and things like that. And I'll just add that some of our concerns with these different kinds of things that you can bet on, these novelty markets, is that women will sign up to these accounts and then they'll actually get prompted throughout the year of other things they can bet on. So it's just another way gambling can become normalized for different groups in the community. Yeah, and so I was thinking about kind of those novel strategies being used by gambling companies, and that's one way where we think they're kind of curbing the regulation. You know, we've been so focused on television advertising and sport, but the gambling industry pivot, they're looking at social media, and I guess it's a really important point that Hannah's raised about the impact this has on our most vulnerable populations. And I think it's really kind of blurring that line between what is considered entertainment, like sport, and kind of that associated risks of gambling when it's so embedded. I think that's all I really want to say. But I thought it was interesting as well, and maybe novel for some people about using kind of those innovative approaches to engage young people in the solutions about gambling, particularly when designing policies that aim to protect young people. And Hannah's kind of gone through and demonstrated that young people do have good ideas about what should be done, and we should be thinking about the ways we think about engaging them on the decisions that are made about the gambling industry.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for those thoughts, Simone. Just a reminder to please put in questions to the Q&A and we'll try and answer them as we can. But going off of what you were just saying, Simone, it's something I also was thinking when Hannah mentioned that young people were talking about social media as an avenue for not only gambling company marketing, but also the opposite strategies at targeting gambling, for example, education or harm reduction. And I was just wondering if there were any examples in Australia or out of social media being used in the opposite direction, and if it's been effective, or what do we know?
Yeah, good question. We draw a lot of our examples at the moment from the climate space. So like we know young people are super engaged. They really love social media. While they understand the risks and some of the misinformation on social media, they really enjoy the idea of making that user-generated content where they can talk about the issues that are important to them. So we kind of look at the climate change space for those kind of examples. We did an interesting kind of methodology one time where we found some people who had experienced gambling harm, and there's quite a big community on TikTok of people, not necessarily young people, but people who have experienced harm sharing their stories. And so we have been thinking about how we can kind of use that to drive you know, like awareness around gambling as an issue, but also reduce some of the stigma that we know can be associated with gambling.
I've also seen that I think it's the Australian government have like working with influencers to tackle vaping, and vaping is obviously a big youth issue at the moment. So I'm interested to see like what kind of effect that has, but really drawing on people who are popular with young people who can give the right message, I think is a really good idea.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely parallels there. I think something that's unique about gambling is that there's an active interest from organizations that are allowed to use these platforms to promote, whereas vaping, you don't see that. It's more user generated, as you're talking about. There are some questions. Damien commented that you can stream MasterChef Australia from your phone, and there are many ads. And I think it's an important comment. It kind of speaks to the accessibility of young people and everybody as a target for marketing at all times. I wonder if you have any ideas on how we can navigate that accessibility with phones.
Yeah, and that was a great point too. And it's one we often bring up around MasterChef specifically, actually, because when we're so focused on sports as a platform and getting gambling advertising out of sporting context, we do miss the fact that there's a lot of family-friendly shows on that 7:30 p.m. Time slot that will contain gambling advertising. So we've had people talk about MasterChef, Survivor, those kind of shows where you're really meant to sit down with your family to watch them, and young people remembering gambling ads there. Then you have another element where you can stream these and there's no kind of restrictions in terms of gambling advertising being promoted there as well. So it kind of speaks to the point of we can't just focus on one element and banning ads in one location because they pop up in these other places. And once you start interacting with technology, young people are doing that in their rooms on their own. It's very hard to monitor and protect young people. So that's why, advocating for that comprehensive ban of all types of marketing tries to kind of counter that.
And I think it is interesting that, a lot of the focus is on when children will be watching, but now we're seeing young people, they're not watching things live. They're able to just get it up on a streaming service whenever they want. So what we thought were traditional viewing times and children were going to bed after 7 p.m. Well, you can watch anytime you like now. And so, the regulation isn't quite keeping up with young people's viewing habits.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Another question from the audience, and perhaps Simone, you could speak to this one first. Any recommendations about how to work with young people and women in the problem gambling space?
So my work has been largely just in research, but we do collaboration, I guess, with different organizations that work with young people and women. Not too sure how to answer to get into that space.
Yeah, that's a hard question. Even I think asked you about what are the options in terms of treatment for gambling. Using my own research experience, thinking about AOD or alcohol and other drug space, there are quite concrete examples of treatment options that come to mind in terms of different levels of severity. And I wonder if there's something similar for the gambling space, or if there needs to be even.
Yeah, definitely needs to be. It's not really treated as kind of like a health or addiction kind of issue. It's more like you get help kind of with your finances and how you manage your finances, which doesn't really recognize this as an addiction. And I do research with people who have experienced harm and have kind of on their recovery journey, and a lot of their first experiences of getting help is through the prison system. So it's not necessarily a clear pathway, I guess, for somebody who is experiencing harm, especially because of a lot of the messaging is kind of that personal responsibility. And if you could only just limit yourself, then you'll be okay, and doesn't quite recognize it as an addiction, and that there's layers and layers of issues that need to be resolved. So it is sad that a lot of the people I've talked to recently, yeah, they've only gotten help since going to prison for stealing and things like that.
And if I could just add as well, like, I think that's what's been one of the big issues of gambling, is that you often only see it at this really extreme end. And so that is really hard for other people who might be experiencing, you know, I don't want to say lower levels of harm, but, you know, harm's on a massive spectrum that can impact people. And so there's not a lot of messaging around those smaller harms that might be at the start of their kind of experiencing harm from this issue. And so we kind of want to move away from that pointy end and try to reach people and prevent this from happening in the first place. But at the moment, gambling still seems so stigmatized that it's so hard for people to talk about the issue. And, you know, I think we're about to talk about this next, but in terms of, like, there's not a lot of representation of different types of people in the gambling prevention and treatment space as well. So just getting those diverse voices and experiences would be really important too.
And just thinking about what you were talking about before, with how on TikTok, for example, there's communities of people with lived experience who are sharing it. That, you know, that's one possible way of having a more therapeutic approach to gambling that could be expanded. Another question related to the practical and therapeutic side of how to help young people and women as well. How can we spread awareness to young people and women about problem gambling? For example, what activities could be potentially helpful or engaging? And either.
Yeah, the first thing I would say about that is bringing women along in the conversation. If we're talking about risks of gambling and potential for gambling harm, this isn't just a young men issue. They do experience rates of gambling harm at a higher rate, but as we've demonstrated today, that the gambling industry are not forgetting about women, and this new generation that's coming through where gambling is so normalized that when they turn 18, it's just as common to start engaging with gambling for women and men as well. So yeah, I would say that level of awareness, I think we have to realize that young people know a lot about gambling. So the awareness of, they already know a lot. We're not teaching anything that they don't know, but how can we, like, harness that that knowledge and kind of shape it in a way that kind of shifts the blame, I guess. So, like, that it's not just this leisure activity that some people have problems with. It's actually a harmful product designed to addict. And there's an industry that only wins if you lose your money. And I think in our work with young people, we've really found that they don't like that the industry takes advantage of them. And so that's one way we can kind of relate to young people, I guess, and flip it on its head like that.
One of the things I wanted to talk about too is just around the language that we use as well. And so while problem gambling is something that the screening tools are used, that are used, we as a group and as a broader public health community really are trying to move away from using the term problem gambling or problem gambler, because it again just reinforces this idea that there's a right way to gamble, and again shifts that onus of responsibility all onto the individual, that you're not doing this product properly, when we know that the gambling industry are doing so many different things, you know, to encourage the use of these products, increase brand awareness, all these kind of things. And so just kind of breaking down some of those stereotypes or myths around gambling and the gambling industry, I think would be really helpful. Like, for young people themselves, they've said that they want honest information about the risks associated with these gambling products, so they can make up their own minds. But, you know, it's really around not just talking about behaviours relating to controlling yourself and setting limits. And it's actually about the fact that, you know, these companies are collecting your data and pushing you with marketing that is tailored towards you, and all those kind of things that, you know, the likelihood of you winning based on these promotions that you're seeing, you know, all those kind of things that just kind of get swept up when you're seeing so many positive messages about a product, that I think we could start there to kind of, yeah, prevent young people feeling so positively about these brands and companies.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to navigate that space, and perhaps giving more empowerment to young people to feel like they have all the information is definitely something that we should focus and emphasize, as you're both saying. Joanne and Stefano have both asked about Melbourne Cup Day and how in Melbourne, it's a public holiday where gambling is actively promoted across age groups and majorly perhaps normalizes betting. I don't know what the question is, but maybe you guys could explore that
Yeah,
as a
absolutely.
cultural phenomenon.
We get this question kind of every single year when Melbourne Cup time rolls around. So we're very used to talking about it. And I think for me, especially as someone who, like, I grew up in Wollongong, so then I moved to Melbourne. And so seeing the kind of emphasis on the public holiday and all these things that really contribute to that cultural accommodation of gambling within our society, you know, we'll see politicians and that placing their bets. And there's been an interesting shift in kind of values and ethics around it in Melbourne specifically, with the increasing kind of animal rights communities, which has been really interesting to see around kind of horse welfare. But what I would say about Melbourne Cup specifically is that the gambling environment has completely changed to when I was growing up, where people were involved in sweeps and those kind of pull a horse out of a hat kind of stuff, which may or may not have been overly problematic back then. But now we've got this big high-tech industry where we're completely covered with positive messages about gambling. It's so accessible. You've got, you know, a gambling venue in your phone that's accessible 24 hours a day. You know, you can gamble on anything, anytime kind of stuff. And so I think just it really does contribute to that social acceptance and you know, normalization of gambling. Particularly when you have government saying it's a public holiday and everyone, you know, the race that stops the nation kind of language.
Yeah, absolutely. And also minimization of the impacts as well comes alongside that. Another question, someone is curious to know the perspective of children and young people have towards individual responsibility. And this is actually something I was thinking about as well, is developing critical thinking as a possible strategy to move the power from companies or marketing in general to the young people. And I guess that is once again about empowerment and giving younger people the tools to interact with the marketing.
Sven, do you want to say anything? Or?
Yeah, Simone, did you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's there's so many issues that young people are kind of competing with, I guess, and they're being marketed to everywhere they go on social media. So I think this is a broader question about not just gambling and other harmful products, but yeah, everything that's kind of presented to them and developing critical skills about who's behind this, who's profiting off this, is this in my best interest, who are they trying to what are they trying to take from me, and stuff like that, and giving young people the tools, the honest information that they can make decisions when they're older about a harmful industry will only help them in the future.
And in terms of, I guess, that individual responsibility, I think young people sometimes do default to that because I think they think that's the correct answer, and that, you know, people should just stop, or maybe, you know, and they will apply responsible gambling terminology to their own, interests in gambling, saying, oh, I wouldn't mind to try it, but I wouldn't go too far. I wouldn't, I'd make sure I have limits and things like that. But the more we dug deeper in a lot of these qualitative discussions that we have with young people, they very quickly lose that, because they often say things like, well, how are people meant to be responsible? I don't understand what gamble responsibly really means. Like, how are people meant to do that? They are skeptical around the government and their willingness to regulate, because they understand that they earn a lot of money from this, and they're skeptical of sporting organizations and the broadcasters and things like that too. So they're battling with what's realistic and what should be done. But so often we find that young people are so empathetic around other people's gambling and people that have experienced harm that we don't see as much in more adult populations. And I think that's one of the real unique perspectives that young people bring, is that ability to be like, this is a really big problem and we need to be doing something about it.
I think that's a great point. And this kind of ties in a little bit as well, is the perspective of parenting as well, and how parents should approach this kind of thing with their children.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to the parent kind of role in all of this. On the first half, that used to be a real big gambling industry narrative, that this was a parent's job to protect their kids, not their job. But we've really kind of demystified all that now, where traditionally young people would see their parents gambling and might want to gamble because the parents are. These days with technology, parents have no clue, that young people are getting all these ads on their phone or all these messages. They're being taught how to gamble through the ads even, and being able to download apps and things like that themselves. I think in terms of actually empowering parents as well, we need to do a lot more in terms of upskilling them and making the community understand the issues with gambling so that they can talk to their children about this too. But we're in one way lucky, although, it's not great, but we're constantly prompted with different times where we could talk to our kids about gambling. There's constant, advertisements that we're seeing, like you're saying, when watching MasterChef and sport and things like that. So there's lots of opportunities for parents to talk to their kids about some of, like you said before, critical thinking around the messages that are being presented to them in the marketing strategies. But we do need to make sure that the parents are giving the right information and moving away from that individual behavioral type stuff.
I do wonder how much putting the onus on critical thinking is just shifting responsibility in a more convoluted way. But I might be missing the point. I'll go to another question. Crystal says this is more of a comment than a question, but the increase or perceived increase of social media videos and user-generated content of gambling. And this is something that, once again, we see with alcohol and other drugs as well. How do we approach this issue? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, as Hannah, when Hannah was saying about like parents don't know what kids are watching and stuff, that like social media comes to mind. It's not even just like people posting their winnings and stuff, people but it's there's you can stream people playing pokies and stuff like that, and it always looks like they're winning so much money and stuff, and we don't even really know if it's legitimate either. We've got streamers that are working with gambling companies. Is it making it seem easier to win? It's a high-tech product, so the gambling product doesn't actually really need to be real anymore. It's just online. So it is a pretty crazy industry, different to the other harmful products that we look at, like alcohol and tobacco. But there are definitely lessons to learn from things like tobacco about an outright ban on gambling marketing on TV and in sport, just to start the denormalization of gambling. And then hopefully we can catch up on some of the social media aspects as well.
I think that is a great kind of summation of what we could potentially do. There is a question regarding your research papers. I would suggest to either go to Deakin University website to look up Hannah or Simone, Otherwise, please reach out to NDARC and we can pass on the information to Hannah and Simone, or we can directly link you to those resources. Probably have time for one or two more questions. I think this is an interesting one around working with the sporting clubs to understand and approach gambling. Do you have any examples of this happening where you go directly to places?
Yeah, absolutely. So the beauty of a public health approach is kind of looking at all those multifaceted and, the different actors and, when we think of professional sporting codes, they're just as much part of the industry as the people that are providing the gambling products at this point. When you're thinking about more local community sporting clubs who, often in New South Wales, particularly they're at they've got pokie venues that they're associated with. We do have a study at the moment where we're talking to sporting clubs about their sponsorship relationships, how they try to make decisions around harmful products and where they see the risk and benefits around things. So while we'd love, a comprehensive ban and for governments to come in and take the decision out of sporting clubs' hands, what we try to do at the same time is try to upskill sporting clubs around, what these relationships might do and how we could try to create healthier kind of relationships for them.
I think it's very complicated because sometimes they're funded by these organizations as well. So
vested interests everywhere in gambling.
It does seem like a conflict of interest sometimes. I think that's all the time we have today. I think we got through a lot of questions. Hopefully or at least I know you guys answered them, but hopefully the audience got a lot or as much as I did from this session. I thought it was great. Thank you so much both for presenting. And as I said before, if your question wasn't answered within the time, then please feel free to either contact us at NDARC and we can pass on questions, or alternatively, I'm sure there are avenues that Hannah and Simone have as well to get into contact. So thank you both so much again.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. And just before we wrap up, we'll also just look forward to the next few weeks. There is a break next week. However, on the 11th of July, we have another presentation on gambling from NDARC's Professor Don Weatherburn, and it's on does increasing gambling expenditure lead to more crime? And also a quick reminder that registrations for our annual research symposium are now open, so please feel free to go straight to that website and apply, because we'd love to see you there. Thanks everyone for attending, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.